Writers throughout history have taken us on journeys through the pages of their stories. Literary giants such as C.S. Lewis took us through the wardrobe and into Narnia. Lewis Carroll took us along with Alice on her many adventures in Wonderland. J.R.R. Tolkien, or Mr. Tolkien as I will call him, created a fantastically imagined land of men, elves, and hobbits, a world rich with history and enthralling tales of mighty heroes and sinister villains. This mystical world is called Middle-earth and is the setting for his signature stories, The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I have read these great books, seen the movies that stem from them, and have also studied the wealth of information that Mr. Tolkien has put forth about Middle-earth. Today, I'm going to be your tour guide on an information-packed journey through this mystical land. On our way, we'll ask the following 3 questions. What is Middle-earth? What does it look like? And who lives there? So without further ado, let's begin our journey. Our first stop is to learn about what exactly Middle-earth is. Frank Jacobs at the website bigthink.com says, Middle-earth, according to Tolkien, is part of our own Earth, but in a previous mythical era. At the time of the events described in Mr. Tolkien's books, Middle-earth is at the end of its 3rd age, about 6,000 years ago. The name Middle-earth comes from the focus on the small portion of the world that was in the middle of the continent. Now that we know a little bit about what Middle-earth is, our next stop will be to think about what it looks like. Mr. Jacobs includes a map in his article that was created by Peter Bird, a professor of geophysics and geology at UCLA. It was based on the comments that Mr. Tolkien made about the Shire, which he said was roughly located in the southwest of England. With that common marker, Professor Bird gives the following corresponding landmarks. The Grey Havens are situated in Ireland. Gondor is North Italy. Rohan is the South Germany, and Mount Doom is in Romania. As you may have noticed, there are sharp angles on the mountain ranges on this map. That has been criticized because that is not the nature of mountains. Mr. Tolkien said that the landscape in Middle-earth was devised dramatically, not geographically. Before we go further, it's important to mention that there are 4 ages on the timeline of Middle-earth. The events in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings take place in the 3rd age. The population is complex, so I'll break this down further into 3 parts. The creators, the good guys, and the bad guys. First, the creators. Iluvatar was the ultimate creator of Middle-earth. He was the god figure. He had 14 spirit children called the Valar. They were the ones that created Middle-earth using their combined knowledge and skill. Melkor was one of his children that went astray. He became Morgoth and was the dark enemy. Next, we have the good guys. We'll start with human men. They were created by the Valar at the beginning of the First Age. They lived for about 145 years on average, except for a special line of humans called Númenóreans. They were descendants of half-elves that chose to be human and usually lived twice as long as the others. Next we have hobbits. Mr. Tolkien said once, I am in fact a hobbit in all but size. I like gardens, trees, unmechanized farmlands. I smoke a pipe and like good plain food. I like and even dare to wear in these dull days an ornamental waistcoat. I am fond of mushrooms from the field. I have a very simple sense of humor. I go to bed late and I get up late. I do not travel much. Hobbits were considered men since they were most closely related to men. A hobbit was considered mature when they turned 33. They usually lived to be about 96 years old on average. There were a couple of exceptions, of course. Bilbo Baggins lived to be 131, and Gollum lived to be 589. They lived longer because each of them had the Ring of Power with them for a while, and that prolonged their lives. Next we have elves. Elves were created before the First Age and were immortal. They were not susceptible to age and disease like the other races were. They were considered mature when they reached 100 years old. They usually were taller than men and had gray eyes. The other races thought they were enchanted. Next we have dwarves. Dwarves were forged by one of the shapers of Middle-earth. They were good fighters and proud of their mining skills. They were not susceptible to disease like men were. A dwarf was considered mature at age 30 and usually lived for about 200 years. The longest living dwarf was named Dwalin, and he lived to be 340 years old. Next we have wizards. Wizards were immortal spirits sent to be advisors to the people of Middle-earth in the Third Age. They took human form as old men to restrict their powers, and they were constrained by their human bodies. They experienced emotion, pain, and death, though they could be restored to their bodies if they died. There were only 5 in existence: Saruman the White, Gandalf the Grey, Radagast the Brown, and there were 2 blue wizards that are not mentioned in any of the stories. Lastly, we have Ents. Ents were people who looked like trees and were the shepherds and protectors of the trees. They were created around the same time as the elves and were immortal as well. Now we're on to the bad guys. There were orcs. Orcs were also known as goblins. That term was used interchangeably throughout the books. They were created by Morgoth to mock the other races. They were made of subterranean heat and slime and were described as beasts of humanized shape. Mr. Tolkien said that the word orc is derived from an Old English word for demon. There were several categories in the books. Lastly, we have trolls. Trolls were created by Morgoth. They were created to mock Ents at the end of the First Age. They also have several categories, and note about trolls is that all but one kind would turn to stone if they were ever exposed to sunlight. With that, we have sadly reached the end of our tour of Middle-earth. This has been an information-packed journey where we talked about what Middle-earth is, what it looks like, and who lives there. Sometimes, a most unlikely journey takes place between the covers of a book. As the wizard Gandalf said in Lord of the Rings, "It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out your door. You step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to."